So as my slide nicely says, I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about memory forensics and some of the things you can do with it. A little bit about who I am, and I kind of have to talk about who I work for because as you see, I'm not using the McAfee Foundstone slide, so I have to talk about it a little bit so my boss will be okay with me being here. That's my alphabet soup. I'm a senior consultant at McAfee Foundstone. Foundstone is a US-based company, but it was bought by McAfee about 10 years ago. And then we moved over to EMEA to kind of go forth and conquer. I work for the flyaway team doing IR forensics, so tomorrow I might be in Dubai, the next day I might be somewhere else, you have no idea, because people get hacked everywhere. I try and do a lot of malware forensics, memory analysis, kind of a potpourri of everything, if you will. I also teach MFIRE, which stands for Malware Forensics and Incident Response, but I think we're going through a rebranding. So it might be called something else tomorrow. But I teach this all around Europe. So if anybody's interested in learning about memory forensics and incident response and PDF exploits, let me know. And in a previous life, if you can't tell, I'm not from this country. I worked for the Department of Defense about 5 or 6 years ago, working for their flyaway team, finding badness. So I modified this slightly based on actually working on this presentation. So basically what I originally intended is kind of not in there, but I still think it's some good stuff that hopefully you guys will find interesting. Still talking about finding things in memory that you wouldn't normally find on a disk unless you were doing some reverse engineering of malware. But I think it's also important to see how memory forensics has really evolved over time. And it's not even that long, because I've been in the field for maybe 5 or 6 years. And when I started doing this, it was running strings on a memory dump. Okay, and something called Volatility with some crazy guys in Maryland were figuring out. No one really heard of it, okay? Now it's amazing what you can parse out of memory. And I'm gonna try and show you guys that. And so this is amazing. People who aren't doing memory dumps for incident response and triage, you should really start thinking about it. And then basically, it's right here. Wouldn't it be great if we could script this, right? Someone said that nerds are lazy. I'm lazy too. So basically trying to script this and try and do some smart thinking involved with the data that we come out of it to try and find badness in a memory dump. Does anybody here do memory forensics? Those are the people I have to worry about when they ask questions. Okay. Okay. So a quick refresher about what malware can do to kind of hide itself. We're not going to go over this. Import address table hooking, export address table hooking, the DCOMs, the SSDT, all these things are things that malware does to try and hide itself. So when you go into your GUI and you run, see what processes are running, it's like, oh, everything's fine. There's nothing weird running. Well, actually, there's a lot of things running, but it doesn't want you to see that, so it's hiding it. But the cool thing is, with a memory dump, it can't hide there. So this is why you can see things that are decrypted. You can actually see variables that are being called and assigned. So memory is a pretty awesome place to be. But just like the registry, it's a very scary place if you don't know what you're doing. But no matter what, so malware can be pretty technical, it can be pretty simple. It depends on what you happen to get that day. But malware has to put itself somewhere on the disk to maintain persistence. Now, that being said, I'm sure there's some malware out there that doesn't maintain persistence. But if malware was always like that, my job would be much easier. Hello, IT, have you tried turning it off and on again? Because that would solve all of our malware problems. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So we have an example, and this is an example that we actually have gotten from one of our customers that said, hey, we found this URL, and what is it? We pulled it down, we have this executable here. Strange metadata. The strings aren't showing us anything, so doing some very, very basic static analysis isn't showing us anything. PEID, which is something that tries to help determine what it's packed with or what it's encoded with, so like UPX or even the Visual C++. So we're not getting anything this way. So, okay. And plus, most of the time, the bad guy isn't going to send you the copy of the malware that he infected your machine with, right? So this is usually running on the machine. You don't know what's going on. So what we can do is you could either do your normal live triage, the old school way, or you can do memory forensics and see what you can find that way. So I should say I'm using Volatility to do this analysis. Volatility is free to download. It has a Windows version as well if you don't like playing in the Linux world. But There's other tools out there, so I'm not going to tell you that this is the only one out there, but this is free. And everyone's bosses like the word free. So this is just running one plugin called PS List, and basically it's listing all the processes. But the cool thing is that you would not see this, obviously, if you just look at the processes that are running on the machine live. You actually see end times as well, right? And you see, net sh.exe, net.exe, sc.exe. And basically, you also see, now obviously I took some things out here. We see another csrss.exe, also not started at the same time as this other one here. Now, CSRSS is something that Windows needs to run, so it started up at boot up time. So this automatically, within 5 seconds, I'm like, well, something's weird about this. And again, it's one of those things where if you've been doing this a while, you just know there should only be one csrss.exe started by this process and started at boot up. You're like, something's weird here. And then you also see that the parent process ID is 2684, which is my suspicious looking CSRSS. So CSRSS, is this really you? So like I said, there's two processes for CSRSS here. So you can use DLL list, which is another plugin for Volatility, to compare the DLLs used and see if there's any differences. Now, this is where baselining is very, very useful. So you know how somebody was talking about the steps in incident response and one is prep. I can't stress enough how important that is. So this way then, if you're like, are there supposed to be two CSRSSs running? If you already have a valid Windows XP Service Pack 3 memory dump, you can go and check. Or if you have a Windows system running, go and check, right? The whole point is knowing how to easily find badness and making life a bit easier for yourself. Anyways, process 612, which I believe is the valid one, uses only 12 modules. Process 2684 uses 59. It's a pretty big difference. And there's also, if you notice, different command line invocations. So now again, Google is your friend, or Bing, I guess, if you want to try that. Where is CSRSS supposed to be? Well, guess what? It's not supposed to be in just C Windows. It's supposed to be here. So suspicious eyes. I'm the first one to have a meme. I'm excited. Okay. Connections. So remember how, like I said, with PS List, you can see a list of all the processes. Well, there's another thing that you can do with Volatility, is you can do PS scan. Now, this has to do with how Volatility goes off and tries to find strings, useful things in memory. One is using doubly linked lists, and the other one, this is scanning, is kind of jumping in the VAD pool, trying to find signatures. But we're not going to go into that. But you can do the same thing with connections. So I kind of show you the difference here. So this is just the regular connections, where it's actually looking through this double linked list, saying, show me all the connections, and says, okay, well, there's nothing. But if I look at con-scan, which is basically going into this pool and saying, hey, if you find any eProcess structures that had a connection, can you please let me know? Okay, actually there was one to this IP, this port, and that's the suspicious process ID that we saw earlier. So again, now this is all within, after you take a memory dump, depending on the size of the memory dump, it could take, I don't know, this took about 5 seconds because I just suspended the VM, and I took the vMemory from there. So it doesn't take very long. So we already have some good clues of finding badness, right? Handles, basically you can see what objects the suspicious process had open, not just files, registry, mutexes, objects. And we see down here, I'm sorry if some of these screenshots are a bit hard to see, but we see here that net.sh.exe. So if you, for some odd reason, you decide not to run PS List, don't know why you wouldn't, but you would say, hey, my suspicious process also has another process associated with it potentially. So I think the point is there's multiple ways of getting to the same amount of data. It's just depending on which way you're comfortable with, okay? You could probably do some of this with network data as well, trying to look at network connections and things like that. If you have network forensics guys, they might be able to figure out the exact same thing, some of it, right? We also see some more network activity with device TCP. We see those two net.exes. We see some mutexes. Now, just because there's a mutex does not mean it's bad. Okay, I should say that right off the bat. Certain known malware like Poison Ivy and things do use mutexes, but just because there's a mutex associated with a process doesn't mean it's a bad process. And then we also see some registry keys, which again, could be a place to go look for things, but it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, that's a bad registry key, because the registry is a big place and it saves a lot of data, as we'll see later on. Threads. Threads are pretty much the workhorse of any process. If there's no threads, it's not doing anything, just the way it is. So PS List said that there's 12 active threads. And the cool thing is when you have two processes that say they're the same thing, you can actually check the priorities from the threads against a baseline, again, baseline, to see, you can pick out the real one. And the next thing you can see, the next execution point, by looking at the extended instruction pointer. So if anybody here, loves writing pen testing for, buffer overflows, they know all about EIPs because that's what they want to get to. And you can basically check and make sure that that EIP is pointed to an imported DLL from that process. Because if not, it means it's jumping somewhere and it's potentially malicious. So check your priorities. So we have our first one on the left hand, our process 612. And we see here it's a base priority of hex value F, which is 15. Yes, 15. And then our suspicious one has a base priority of 8. So the higher the number, the more priority it has in Windows world. So as I said, the CSRSS is required for Windows to run, especially in the XP world, because this handles the GUI console. Now, that being said, malware can change this to make it mimic this, but they usually don't because we're lazy. And usually people don't go into this amount of detail. You can actually figure out the bad process, I guess, with Stuxnet as well, because if there were two LSAS, you could check the base priorities and see that they were different. So even something like Stuxnet can do that. So remember I talked about the EIP. So this is one of the threads. And we have our extended instruction pointer. And I just want to basically, remember that DLL list I had before? I'm basically going through and saying, hey, is that in one of those DLLs that I have called with this process? It says yes, yay. So it's not jumping off somewhere. If anybody uses the sysinternals tools, and if you have hands on the box, you can see this using this process explorer. Just check the threads and you can see exactly that happening, saying, hey, this is my thread ID and this is where it's going. That's the start address, sorry. So you can make sure that those DLLs are actually being called. And again, the same thing almost, like I just showed you. This is just doing it in memory. So one's a bit GUI friendly, but sometimes you don't have hands on the box. Sometimes, especially if it's remote, you're trying to deal with some guy who has no idea what's going on. You just run this, you try and give them scripts to run. They don't run it right. Just do this one thing and then just give me the data and I'll parse it myself. So, okay, a very simple thing to do with memory is just to run process executable dump, proc exe dump, and then just run strings on it. And you can dump suspicious processes and do analysis this way. And you actually get a lot more information. So we run